The story of one of the most talked about conditions of modern times did not begin in the sterile silence of a laboratory amid the beeping of instruments, but in the scribbled margins of a children's poetry book. It was the year 1845. A German physician, Heinrich Hoffmann, rubbing his tired eyes and glancing at a cooling cup of coffee with a brown ring frozen along its rim, decided he'd had enough. He was sick to death of the syrupy, moralizing tales of his era. He took up his pen and sketched a story about a boy named Zap. This hero spun like a wound-up top, knocked over salt shakers, and couldn't sit still for a single minute, becoming the first hint in world literature of what would later be called attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Hoffman didn't lecture on neurobiology and didn't know the word synapse, but he damn well captured that chaos in the head with uncanny precision. His character constantly fidgeted, and any trifle, say a fat sleepy fly crawling along the window pane or the creak of a floorboard, instantly hijacked all of his attention. "Sit up straight, Philip!" someone seems to shout from the pages. "I am sitting," he replies, even though his left leg is already living a life of its own, tapping out a drum roll on the chair leg. "You're about to spill your soup on your trousers." "Oh, look, that bird has some kind of red thread in its beak." Today, psychologists see in this description not mere caprice, but a classic case of dopamine deficiency. It is precisely the lack of this viscous chemical substance that prevents the brain from latching onto what matters, turning the simplest tasks into an exhausting marathon through a swamp. For a long time, such things were hidden behind the insulting labels of disobedience or bad character. Sometimes people said it bluntly, not enough spanking. Yet Zapp's example proves that what for centuries was considered a flaw in upbringing or plain laziness is in fact an inborn peculiarity of the wiring inside the skull. More than 175 years ago, Dr. Hoffman intuitively felt what science would confirm only in recent decades. This is not a whim. It is a specific, jagged mode of brain operation that for centuries remained misunderstood and mocked. Understanding that the outward twitchiness is rooted in deep biology finally knocks the ground from under the feet of those who love to slap on labels. When modern scientists peer inside the head with heavy, humming scanners, they see not a lack of discipline, but a very concrete, erratic chemical score. It turns out that in the prefrontal cortex, right there behind the forehead, dopamine production is reduced by 20 or 30%. Dopamine is not just a happiness hormone. It is the key that starts the engine of motivation. To feel what this means, imagine an old, heavy truck with a powerful engine. But instead of gasoline, there are only a couple of liters of cheap surrogate sloshing in the tank. The machine is a beast. It could move mountains, but it simply cannot get going at the right moment. It sputters, coughs, stalls. Because of this chemical shortfall, any mundane trifle, say the need to pay the electricity bill when there's a mountain of unwashed dishes on the table, suddenly looms before your eyes like a concrete wall. Starting, in such a case, turns into torture. The brain spins its wheels like tires in spring mud. A person may suddenly freeze with a toothbrush in hand, staring at a crack in the tiles, simply because the inner neural spark has gone out. "Did you forget your keys again?" asks the wife, standing in the doorway. I was just thinking about how the clasps on your bag work. It's 7 in the morning, we're late. Yes, the keys, right. They were somewhere here. Wasn't there a receipt from the store? Many take this for weakness or laziness, but in reality, it is a physical hunger of a system that lacks the resources to start. Yet nature rarely takes without giving something in return. This dopamine shortage forces the nervous system to wriggle, to build strange detours and hyperconnections. While everyone else trudges slowly and tediously along well-trodden logical paths, the dopamine-starved brain builds associations at the speed of a forest fire. It is a mad torrent of ideas racing toward the horizon. If you learn not to drown in this current, yesterday's curse becomes a tool. This is not a broken mechanism, but a different assembly method, where behind perpetually untied shoelaces and the agony of starting tasks lies the ability to see connections where others see only emptiness. It is potential for insights that never visit normal minds accustomed to order and silence. Realizing that the brain is running in a state of perpetual hyperdrive is only the first step toward stopping yourself from crashing into every doorframe along the way. To turn the internal white noise into at least some kind of intelligible route map, you don't have to immediately sign up for expensive examinations and wait your turn for the sterile maw of a scanner. There is a faster, more elegant way. In 2005, leading psychiatrists of the World Health Organization gathered and released a tool they called the Adult Self-Report Scale, or simply ASRS. It is a questionnaire of 18 concise questions. It works like a sudden slap in the face, finally forcing you to see the true cause of your endless domestic catastrophes. You sit there, picking at a hangnail or twirling a chewed pen cap between your fingers, and suddenly you read, "How often do you finish other people's sentences because it seems to you that they are taking too long to get to the point?" Or, "Do you abandon a project at the very moment when the hardest part is already done and only tedious polishing remains?" And you realize it's not about laziness, it's about you. It says here, "Do you often lose things?" Someone asks off screen. "Well, yesterday I was looking for my phone while lighting the way with the flashlight on that same phone. Does that count?" Probably. Mark it down. Many people live for decades thinking they are simply hopeless until they honestly start ticking boxes next to statements about the total inability to sit through a 10-minute meeting. Amazingly, this simple questionnaire can identify up to 70% of cases of the syndrome even without a doctor's direct involvement at the first stage. It works not like an abstruse treatise, but like an old magnifying glass. Suddenly you see that the keys left on the kitchen table aren't the result of early dementia, but because at the moment they landed on the countertop, your brain was already building a colony on Mars. If the final score exceeds 14, the system sends a clear signal: stop forcing your will. It's time to start hacking your impulses. Instead of once again promising yourself to get serious starting Monday, such a result points to the method of microtasks. That's when you don't clean the whole apartment, but pick up this one blue sock. This approach allows you to trick the perpetually starving reward system. Impulsivity gradually turns into a controlled flow, and you finally stop feeling like a passenger in an uncontrollable race car. When the express test points the direction, a truly deep dive into personal history begins. It's like the work of an archaeologist who, instead of golden goblets, digs up old grievances and absurd failures from memory. A specialist, relying on the strict criteria of the DSM-5 classification, doesn't just listen to complaints about poor memory. He literally excavates layers of your past for a full hour, sometimes longer. A clinical interview is not an interrogation under a lamp, though the office may feel uncomfortable. It might smell of old paper, cheap ocean breeze air freshener, or cold tea. The most important condition, the specific symptoms must persist continuously for at least 6 months and must necessarily originate in early childhood. The doctor methodically reconstructs the picture of your life. "Tell me about school. How was math?" "Oh, I knew the answers to all the problems. But my notebook was a mess. The teacher said my head was a party that discipline forgot to attend. And once I forgot to put on my pants for PE, came in just tights. I was 8. And concentration? I remember in 4th grade I spent half an hour watching dust motes dance in a beam of light above my desk. It was far more interesting than long division." The doctor asks questions that force you to look at familiar failures in a new way. How many times have you quit jobs because by the 3rd month it became unbearably boring? This framing helps separate biology from imagined character flaws. In 80% of cases, details surface during such conversations that the person had considered proof of their own stupidity. Old failing grades, earned not because of lack of intelligence, but because the instructions for the test were skimmed diagonally. Something important happens in the office. What for years was a shameful defect acquires a solid name. This is not a vice, not a lack of backbone. It is a specific mode of neuronal operation. Such an interview becomes the very key that opens the door to self-understanding. Instead of the agonizing guilt over years wasted, a strange, prickly relief arrives. The brain simply required a different management approach, and all past mistakes were merely the result of trying to run extremely complex software on hardware not designed for it. The silence in the head doesn't come immediately after such a realization, but it finally becomes possible. When the clinical interview has finally shaken all the dusty skeletons out of the closets and the heavy burden of years of guilt for being wrong slips from your shoulders, it's time to turn the inner jelly into a working mechanism. This is where cognitive behavioral therapy enters the stage. This is not about lying on a couch for hours and complaining about a cold childhood. It's more like applied mental engineering. Instead of telling yourself for the 100th time, just pull yourself together, through clenched teeth, this method proposes dismantling the terrifying monster of any task into tiny, almost ridiculous pieces. Any task that once seemed like an impregnable concrete wall is now mercilessly chopped into 5-minute segments. You're not doing a deep clean, no. You're just picking up one dirty blue sock and carrying it to the hamper. That's it. At this stage, you're legally allowed to stop and go watch capybara videos. But the trick is that the brain, having received this microscopic dose of dopamine for a completed action, often agrees to a second sock. So I just set a kitchen timer for 5 minutes? You ask, twirling a plastic tomato-shaped timer in your hands. Exactly. 5 minutes of work, then you have every right to drop everything and ride off into the sunset. But I won't get anything done that way. You'll get more done than in the 3 hours you spent sitting there blaming yourself for inaction while staring at a blank monitor. Large-scale studies conducted in the early 2000s confirm this works. Practice shows that after just 12 regular sessions with a specialist, overall productivity increases by 40%. It's a way to elegantly hack the reward system using ordinary mechanical clocks as crutches for the mind. One person who went through this path recalled that his ideas used to drown in the gray, everyday sludge before even taking shape as words. Now he has learned to channel them, not because he became stronger in spirit, but because he bought 3 identical timers and placed them around the apartment. Sometimes, however, observing thoughts alone isn't enough. When psychological probing stalls, the Connors scale comes into play. It's a rather tedious but impartial tool that turns your daily life into a data table. An outside perspective is crucial here. Loved ones fill out questionnaires, answering questions you yourself have learned to ignore. Does he get up 5 times during a short dinner to check for notifications? Does he constantly fidget with a button or twirl a fork in his hands? These everyday details are like raindrops on a windshield, individually meaningless, but together they block the view. Behind this external chaos lies a real electrical storm visible on an electroencephalogram. An EEG is when they put a strange cap with wires on your head, like a prop from low-budget cyberpunk, and smear your hair with sticky cold gel. The device records a specific jumble of alpha rhythms. Studies confirm, in people with this neural setup, natural inhibitory mechanisms work 15% weaker than normal. This is physics, not laziness. Back in 1845, Heinrich Hoffmann intuitively described this in verses about fidgety Philip, who couldn't sit at the table. Today, science confirms his guesses with dry graphs. Modern tests combined with MRI allow jewel-like precision in separating wheat from chaff, for example, ruling out major depression or an anxiety disorder. Unfortunately, many wander for years in a fog of incorrect diagnoses. Nearly 30% of adult patients do not receive the help they need, simply because their assessment lacked a stage of objective brain function diagnostics. It's important to understand, such a brain is not broken. In the doctor's office, smelling of antiseptic and old linoleum, the graphs show that your internal engine simply runs at too high an RPM. This is not a defect, it's hyperdrive. And if you learn to shift gears, this super powerful motor will stop burning rubber in place and finally take you where you've long dreamed of going. When the internal rhythms are finally decoded and objective tests confirm that under the hood you really do have a roaring super engine rather than a sputtering old carburetor, the question arises, how do you manage this at the level of physics? This is not about willpower, it's about climbing into the circuit breaker of your own skull. Modern medicine offers not just to mute the symptoms, but to carefully adjust the very chemistry of the process. One of the main tools here is atomoxetine. It's a strange thing. It doesn't resemble the stimulants they make movies about. Your pupils don't dilate, and you don't feel compelled to rearrange all the furniture overnight. It works boringly, almost imperceptibly, precisely raising norepinephrine levels. No euphoria, no high, no artificial sparkle in the eyes. Just after 4 weeks, you suddenly notice that the intensity of chaotic impulses in your head has dropped by about 50%. You're no longer a hostage to every pigeon flying past. So I'll just become normal? You ask, examining the white capsule. You'll become predictable to yourself, the doctor replies, without looking up from the chart. Less fuss, more action. Try it. Technological progress of the 2020s has brought even wilder solutions. For example, translingual neurostimulation, or TLNS. It sounds like a secret project from KGB basements, but in reality, it's a plate with electrodes that you put in your mouth. It tickles the receptors, sending signals straight to the brainstem. It's an attempt to restore balance between the gas and the brakes in your head. Just 10 sessions, and the biological brakes that once resembled the worn pads of an old Lada begin to grip. Patients say it feels like a long-awaited calm. You sit at work for 3 hours straight, and your ideas no longer crumble at the slightest rustle behind the door. The metallic taste from the electrodes is a small price to pay for the ability to simply finish a report. A real breakthrough happens when technology meets something tangible. If you add traditional acupuncture to modern medication and stimulation, the overall effect increases by another 25%. It's a powerful combo. A brain that once sprayed energy in all directions like a leaky hose learns to hit the target in a focused stream. Yesterday's attention deficit turns into hyperfocus. You don't just adapt, you turn your strange biology into an advantage. But external intervention is only half the story. The most elegant part is teaching the brain to steer itself. Since the early 1990s, psychologists have worked with biofeedback therapy. This is when sensors are attached to your head, and your brain waves are displayed on a monitor as a game or graph. You watch the screen and try to calm the image by sheer force of thought. It's brutally exhausting, a true mental gym. But it works. Look, the therapist says, pointing to the jumping curve. When you start winding yourself up, the line goes up. Now try to lower it. Don't ask how. Just feel it. And you sit there sweating, trying to catch that state. Data show that after such training, sleep quality improves by 60%. The brain finally earns the right to a deep reboot instead of simply collapsing into anxious oblivion for a couple of hours. Alongside this exists bioacoustic correction. Here, the brain is made to listen to itself. The equipment turns your EEG into sound. You sit in headphones, listening to the strange, sometimes jagged music of your own mind. The nervous system, hearing this chaos from the outside, begins to smooth the rhythm on its own, like an experienced conductor suddenly realizing the violins are horribly out of tune. 15 sessions without a single pill are enough to tune the internal clock. In our clinical practice, the combination of tongue stimulation and this brain music yields striking results. Statistics are stubborn. Such a combination leads to stable remission in 70% of adult patients. It's salvation for those whom standard methods don't help, or whose bodies react too capriciously to medication. Neuronal chaos turns into a controllable superpower. You simply take the helm into your own hands. At last. The DSM-5 diagnostic standard, officially updated in 2013, is a hefty brick of paper and terminology that finally decrypts ADHD as a chronic but fully manageable condition. Instead of a life sentence or the stigma of being a defective adult, this definition became something like a detailed operating manual for an overly complex temperamental engine. When you discover 4 or 5 classic signs of impulsivity mixed with perpetually cold coffee forgotten on the edge of the table and 3 half-read books on the nightstand, it's no longer a reason for quiet despair. You see, says the patient, nervously twirling a pen cap, It just feels like I have too many tabs open in my head. And on one of them, music is definitely playing, but I can't find which one. The doctor nods. He's seen this hundreds of times. To close the extra tabs, there are now 3 proven methods in the arsenal, from the grounded and almost comical division of tasks into 5-minute segments, when you promise yourself to wash just one plate, not the whole pile of dishes, to high-tech neurostimulation. These biological oddities that once interfered with life, with the right approach, turn into a resource. Not a magic spark, but ordinary, working fuel. The real stories of those who have gone through this glossy shine. One entrepreneur, let's call him Anton, spent years thinking of himself as a lazy, failed genius. His office was buried under sticky notes that he stopped noticing 10 minutes after sticking them up. He could spend hours studying how a telescope works when he needed to submit a quarterly report. After therapy, he didn't become a robot. He simply learned to hack his mental storms. In meetings, he now fidgets with a heavy metal cube. This helps him ground himself. His startup took off not because he became disciplined, but because he channeled his natural chaos into innovation. I used to just drown in ideas, Anton recalls, adjusting mismatched socks, and now I've learned to build a raft out of them. It's still chaos, but at least it stays afloat. Career growth in such cases is not a miracle, but a side effect of a person no longer spending 80% of their energy on a pointless struggle with themselves. This entire path, from 1845, when Dr. Heinrich Hoffmann described Fidgety Philip in a children's poem, to the advent of high-precision atomoxetine and bioacoustic correction systems, is a story of long evolution, from attempts to beat the nonsense out of a child to understanding the subtlest chemistry of neurons. This long journey turned an old curse into a working tool. ADHD today is not a heavy sack of stones on your back, but simply a specifically tuned piece of equipment. In the doctor's office, the air conditioner hums softly. Outside, someone unsuccessfully tries to start an old motorcycle, and the person sitting opposite the physician feels for the first time in a long while that they are the master of their own head. For those who have learned to manage their neurobiology, horizons open that often remain unnoticed by people with ordinary, linear thinking. This is not a mistake of nature. It's simply another way of being effective in a world that has itself long become too fast and chaotic. You just take the helm, and it turns out you can fly anywhere. The main thing is to remember where the keys are. This time they seem to be on the hallway shelf, not in the freezer,